Section 20.3 Voltaic cells. The energy released in a spontaneous redox reaction can be used to perform electrical work. This task is accomplished through a voltaic or a galvanic cell, a device in which the transfer of electrons takes place through an external pathway rather than directly between reactants. One such spontaneous reaction occurs when a strip of zinc is placed in contact in a solution containing copper-2 ions. As the reaction proceeds, the blue color of the copper-2 ion fades and the copper metal deposits on the zinc. At the same time, the zinc begins to dissolve. These transformations are shown in Figure 20.3 and are summarized in Equation 20.7. Zinc solid plus copper-2 ion yields a zinc 2 ion and copper solid. Figure 20.4 shows a voltaic cell that uses the redox reaction between zinc and copper ions in Equation 20.7. Although the setup as shown in Figure 20.4 is more complex than that in Figure 20.3, it's important to recognize that the reaction is the same in both cases. Unlike Figure 20.3, in 20.4 the zinc metal and the copper-2 ions are no longer in direct contact. Consequently, the reduction of the copper can occur only by a flow of electrons through an external circuit, namely the wire that connects the zinc and the copper strips. The two solid metals that are connected by the external circuit are called electrodes. By definition, the electrode at which the oxidation occurs is called the anode. The electrode at which reduction occurred is called the cathode. To help with memorization, note that the anode and oxidation both occur with a vowel, and cathode and reduction both begin with a consonant. We can think of the voltaic cells as two half cells, one corresponding to the oxidation half reaction and one corresponding to the reduction half reaction. In our present example, zinc is oxidized and copper-2 ion is reduced. The anode, the oxidation half reaction, is zinc going to zinc ion plus electrons. The cathode, which is the reduction half reaction, is copper-2 ion plus 2 electrons yields copper metal. Electrons become available as zinc metal is oxidized at the anode. They flow through the external circuit to the cathode, where they are consumed as copper-2 is reduced. Because zinc metal is oxidized in the cell, the zinc electron loses mass and the concentration of zinc 2 plus solution increases as the cell operates. Similarly, the copper electrode gains mass and the copper-2 ion solution becomes less concentrated as the copper-2 is reduced to copper metal. As the voltaic cell operates, oxidation of the zinc introduces additional zinc 2 ions into the anode compartment. Unless a means is provided to neutralize this positive charge, no further oxidation can take place. Similarly, the reduction of the copper-2 at the cathode leaves an excess of negative charge in the solution in that compartment. Electrical neutrality is maintained by a migration of ions through the porous glass disc separating the two compartments. As in Figure 20.4, or through a salt bridge as illustrated in Figure 20.5. A salt bridge consists of a U-shaped tube that contains an electrolyte solution, such as sodium nitrate, whose ions will not react with the other ions in the cell or with the electrode. The electrolyte is often incorporated into a gel so that the electrolyte solution does not run out when the U-tube is inverted. As oxidation and reduction proceed as at the electrodes, ions from the salt bridge migrate to neutralize charge in the cell compartments. Anions migrate towards the anode and cations toward the cathode. In fact, no measurable electron flow will occur through the external circuit unless a means is provided for ions to migrate through the solution from one electrode compartment to another, thereby completing the circuit. Figure 20.5. Voltaic cell that uses a salt bridge to complete the electrical circuit. Figure 20.6 summarizes the relationship among the anode, cathode, and chemical processes occurring in a voltaic cell, the direction of migration of ions in a solution, and the motion of electrons in the electrical circuit. Notice in particular that in any voltaic cell, the electrons flow from the anode through an external circuit to the cathode. Because the negatively charged electrons flow from the anode to the cathode, the anode in a voltaic cell is labeled with a negative sign, and the cathode with a positive sign. We can envision the electrons being attracted to the positive cathode from the negative anode through the external circuit, and the anode and cathode are labeled with negative and plus signs respectively. You should not interpret the labels as the charges of the electrode. The labels simply tell us that the electrode at which the electrons are released to the external circuit, the anode, and received from the external circuit, the cathode. The actual charges on the electrodes are essentially zero. Figure 20.6. A summary of the terminology used in describing voltaic cells. Oxidation occurs at the anode. Reduction occurs at the cathode. The electron flows spontaneously from the negative anode to the positive cathode. The electrical circuit is completed by the movement of ions in the solution. Anions move towards the anode, whereas cations move towards the cathode. The cell compartments can be separated by either a porous glass barrier or by a salt bridge. A molecular view of electrode processes. In order to understand better the relationship between voltaic cells and spontaneous redox reactions, it's instructive to look at what happens to the atomic or molecular level. The actual processes involved in the transfer of electrons are quite complex. Nevertheless, we can learn much by examining these processes in a simplified way. Let's first consider the spontaneous redox reaction between zinc solid and copper-2 ion, illustrated in Figure 23. During the reaction, zinc is oxidized into zinc 2 ion, and copper-2 ion is reduced to copper metal. Figure 20.7 shows a schematic diagram of how these processes occur at the atomic level. We can envision the copper-2 ions coming in contact with a strip of zinc metal, as in Figure 20.7a. 2 electrons are transferred directly from the zinc atom to the copper-2 ion, leading to a zinc 2 ion and a copper metal atom. The zinc 2 ion migrates into the aqueous solution, while the copper atom remains deposited on the metal strip. As the reaction proceeds, we produce more copper and deplete the copper-2 ion, as we saw in Figure 20.3b. Figure 20.7. Depiction of the reaction between zinc solid and copper-2 ion at the atomic level. The water molecules in the anions in the solution are not shown. A copper-2 ion comes in contact with the surface of the zinc strip and gains 2 electrons from a zinc atom. The copper ion is reduced and the zinc atom is oxidized. The resulting zinc 2 ion enters the solution and the copper atom remains deposited on the strip. The voltaic cell in Figure 20.5 also involves the oxidation of zinc solid and the reduction of copper-2 ions. In this case, however, electrons are not transferred directly between the reacting species. Figure 20.8 shows qualitatively what happens to each of the electrodes in the cell. At the surface of the anode, the zinc atom loses 2 electrons and becomes a zinc 2 ion in the anode compartment. We envision the 2 electrons traveling from the anode through the wire to the cathode. At the surface of the cathode, the 2 electrons reduce the copper-2 ion to a copper atom, which is deposited on the cathode. As we noted earlier, the flow of electrons from the anode to the cathode is possible only if ions are transferred through the salt bridge in order to maintain overall charge balance for each of the 2 compartments. We see that the redox reaction between zinc and copper ions is spontaneous, regardless of whether they react directly or in separate compartments of the voltaic cell. In each of these, overall reaction is the same. Only the path by which electrons are transferred from the zinc atom to the copper ion is different. In the next section, we'll examine why this reaction is spontaneous.